Hey listeners, welcome to Revolving Time. Time is a fascinating and universal concept that affects every aspect of our life, from the way we measure our days to the way we experience the world around us. On this channel, we'll explore real stories, cheating stories, relationship advice, confessions, and more, covering everything from the latest research on time perception to the history of calendars and clocks. Join me as we delve into the mysteries of time and uncover the hidden secrets and surprising truths that lie behind this essential part of our existence. If you really enjoy our storytelling, feel free to subscribe and become part of the Revolving Time community. Okay, let's go on to story. This story is a bit longer than most of my stories. I do apologize for that, but I wanted to explore an idea. That doesn't explain my need to inflict it upon you, the listeners, but I have. Also, it doesn't contain any explicit sex. Truth is, I've been enjoying a happier place telling love stories. Still, the itch needs to be scratched, and I often wonder what form of revenge brings any real measure of satisfaction. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, although I am repeatedly drawn to that utility knife I employed in A Carpenter's Best Friend. I like revenge that isn't life-threatening, and that doesn't get you arrested but is horribly humiliating for the cheater, because humiliation is what the betrayed spouse feels. Despite that, there is no real physically revenge in this story. I suppose this effort is part story and part travelogue. I started thinking of driving cross-country as a metaphor for moving on in life. I realized that no matter how far we go to escape our lives, we carry those lives with us. I became a shut-in, and getting out and about became an almost exotic dream. Anyway, this is a story about a man betrayed who ghosts his marriage. My name is Andrew Baker. My friends call me Ab, but never Andy. There is always some obnoxious drunk, some jackass who doesn't know me and wants to be more familiar than he deserves, and he'll always call me Andy. So, Andy, what do you do for a living? I tell him, I build a neat little device that cops can just point at you from 40 feet away and tell if you're drunk. They've started attaching them to radar guns around town. That usually shuts them up, although if you haven't guessed it yet, that device doesn't really exist. I guess you can tell that I don't suffer fools very well. Lie to me and it gets worse. I'm not a complicated man. In fact, I like a simple life. I enjoy my work. I'm an engineer with a large national company that has many branch offices across the country. I have friends. I don't drink much, but I'll have the occasional beer. Truth be told, I prefer the nachos, but that's my struggle. If I let it get out of control, I'll put on weight. I need to keep that beast at bay, so I struggle and stay in reasonable shape for a man my age. I used to sail every chance I got, but a wife and 2 baby girls can put demands on a man's time, and I soon sold the boat. That's just one of life's little sacrifices that I made years ago, and I made it happily, so I'd have the time to spend with the people that matter to me. I've been happily married to Karen, a high school teacher, for 25 years. Our 2 girls are both in college now. Claire is up in Rhode Island at Brown, and her younger sister, Denise, is at Boston University. I doubt I could afford schools like that, but the girls are serious students and earn some exceptional scholarship. We live in North Carolina in an area they call the Research Triangle. It's built on several very good universities in the Raleigh area with top-flight high-tech firms all around. It's a great place to live and work. I'd tell you about Carolina barbecue, but I'll just get hungry thinking about it. I was more than a little disappointed when the girls chose to go north for college, but I guess they needed to spread their wings a little, and in the long run that's a good thing. The girls are great. They are smart, funny, personable young women with a strong sense of right and wrong. I worry about their safety every day, but I don't worry about their choices. Seeing them raised and taking those first steps of independence meant that my wife and I would finally have time for ourselves again. I'd been looking forward to these days for some time. With both girls off at college, I had fantasies of coming home every night to a loving wife who poured her attention onto me and mine onto her until life was one joyful day after another. We could be like newlyweds again. We would go out to dinner, see plays, go to movies, and finally reconnect the way I'd always wanted. It didn't work out quite that way. Truth be told, over that first year of our empty nest, Karen started changing. Her interests were moving away from me, or so it seemed. It was gradual, but over time it could be seen. I wrote it off as her chance to blossom now that the girls had moved out, but eventually I realized that what I was watching was a fundamental change in her values and priorities. Karen teaches English with an emphasis on creative writing. To be honest, and I hope fair, she is a frustrated writer. As a young mother and teacher, she never had the time to write the way she wanted. Karen writes all summer long and whenever she can spare an hour or two, but nothing much has ever come of it. She would regularly submit essays and short stories to literary magazines, developing only an extensive collection of rejection letters, while the masterwork never materialized. If I were truthful, I do love to read what my wife writes, but as a writer she's never reached beyond formulae and often melodramatic tales. She has a romantic idea of what a writer is supposed to be, and I suspect, not that I would ever tell her, that she is drawn more to the idea of being a writer than to the writing itself. No matter. If she's happy, I'm happy. For most of our marriage, Karen has belonged to one writing group or another. These are people who get together for the purpose of helping each other, critiquing, suggesting, and discussing their work in an effort to make each other better. Some of the groups have seemed to me to be genuinely productive, while others are more like mutual admiration society. Her last group, which was her current group when it all fell apart, had a bit of both. They took turns meeting at each other's home, and when they were here, I'd try to make myself scarce. I did try to participate once, but that got me some disapproving looks from Karen and a few others, so I gave up trying. Karen's current writing group has about 10 people with both men and women. I like some of them, others I could live without. Half are nondescript and half make a very definite impression when you meet them. Reggie, a woman, is heavy into writing histories and biographies. She does real research and writes books that have a strong academic vein while still trying to engage the reader. I have read them all and I like them a lot. I've told her so. Betty likes to write fantasy. I don't think she imagines herself the next J.K. Rowling. She's more the talking unicorn type, but she's pleasant and she seems to write mostly for her own pleasure. Who can fault that? Bill is the resident know-it-all. A little of that can go a long way, but he seems okay in every other regard. Then there is Frank. I heard alarms in my head the first time I met him, and those alarms have not stopped sounding since. When I was introduced to Frank, and I was most definitely made to feel that I was being introduced to him and not the other way around. He said, "So, Andy, what do you do?" I looked at my wife, who pursed her lips and shook her head at me, and I just said, "Engineer, Frank." Was that a smile or a smirk he gave me? I told you that I gave up trying to participate in their group, but I tend to be more out of sight and out of mind, but not out of sound. When they come over, I'll be in the next room working quietly, or on the back porch with an open window until they forget I'm there. I noticed early on that when Frank interacts with Karen, it's almost like they have their own private jokes. Sometimes he inflates her ego, and other times he seems to know her thoughts with an intimacy that I don't care for one little bit. He makes references to past conversations, and I get the impression the rest of the group has no memory of them. It's just a feeling, but I don't like it, and I've told her so. She just dismisses my concerns, and I know better than to push it. I've made sure she knows how I feel about it. The rest is on her. The group has a pattern to their meetings. After the working session, the group settles down with some wine and loosens up. That's when I learned that some of them are just pretenders. It was the middle of the spring semester, early March, when the conversation turned to the lifestyle of real writers. Oh, all the great writers were alcoholics. True, they write in the mornings and drink in the afternoons and evenings. It loosens up the brain to new ideas, and then in the mornings their creative juices flow, and they write. Actually, the truly great writers all had love affairs. That was their real inspiration. That was Frank speaking. "Thanks, Frank. I've got your number." That's when Karen tied a knot in my stomach. Oh, I know. It's the passion and the excitement of the unknown, the thrill of hiding it all from the eyes of others. That's where the real inspiration lies. Some of them laughed at that and some didn't, so I told myself it was just a joke, but I kept one ear on them the rest of the night. Maybe we should just all have a wild sex night sometime, and then we will all write the great American novel. That was Bill. I couldn't tell if he intended it as a joke or not. Character flaws are not the foundation of great writing. Humanity, compassion, and the challenge of the unknown are what great stories are built on. I told you I liked Betty. Great stories are all about facing adversity, reaching for greatness against all odds, and making the world better than it was before. Well, maybe if you just cast the right spell, we can save ourselves all the trouble. That was asshole Frank again. To their shame, some of the group seemed to think that was funny. I doubt that Betty did, and I suspected that Reggie didn't, either. Their conversation continued with this writer's drinking habits, and that writer's mistress, then I continued to listen without tipping my hand. Then I caught an interesting discussion. Is anyone else applying for the Illinois Writers Workshop this summer? It was Frank again. Oh, I already applied. I'm hoping they let me in. 6 weeks to just write and talk with writers. It could be a real game changer for me. It was Karen, and this was the first I'd heard about it. Frank picked up on it right away. I'm sure they'll let you in. Your writing has improved so much this past year. I know you'll be admitted. I've applied, too, but I'm not as confident I'll get in. My bullshit meter was pegged. Really, Frank, since when are you so modest? I didn't like what I was hearing, but at this point I still loved and trusted my wife. When you've been married for as long as us, your trust is fundamental. You don't ask yourself, is she behaving badly? The thought doesn't occur to you. A marriage is a team, and your partner is your better half. She has proven her dedication year after year, and all you really hope for is that she will have the success and satisfaction that she deserves. At least, that's what you think. Then later, it all goes out the window when you learn that your trust has been betrayed. Update. Time passed and I allowed myself to forget that night's overheard conversation. Like I said, I trusted my wife. Some young guys never understand that. But after more than 2 decades of marriage, trust is as much a way of life as a choice. Late April rolled around, and I was outside working in the garden when I decided I was done for the day, and headed in. As I reached for the kitchen door, I overheard my wife on the phone say, "I can't wait. 6 whole weeks without responsibility. no obligations, and no one waiting for me to come home. That last bit registered. I stood frozen and listened. I know, it's going to be the most indulgent 6 weeks of my life. I owe this to myself. So do you. Nothing about this made me happy. I opened the door and stepped into the kitchen. Karen was startled. Well, I have to go. Ab is here and I need to get dinner started. She hung up quickly. Who was that? Oh, that was just Reggie. We were talking about the school ending soon. The hell you were, I thought. I wanted to ask her about specific things she'd said, especially that part about ... and no one waiting for me to come home, but I had a feeling the truth was in limited supply tonight. My mood turned dark, but I worked to hide it for now. Later that night, after dinner, the other shoe fell. Ab, you will never guess the great news I got today. Remember that writer's workshop in Illinois that I applied for? No? Oh, sure you do. You never listened to me. The truth is I was well aware of that workshop, but only because I'd overheard her talking about it that night more than a month ago. No, I don't think you ever told me about it. Yes, I did. Well, I applied for a 6-week writer's workshop. It's mid-June to late July at the University of Illinois. There are lectures by the professors there, and they bring in these great writers for seminars and discussions groups. And then we write. It's a great opportunity, and I've been accepted into the program. That sounds great, love. I'm sure we can afford it. Maybe I can get a little time off and join you. I'd love to hear some of those writers speak. That remark seemed to catch her off guard. Oh, well, we can try. It's going to be a very intensive 6 weeks, and I'm not going to have much time to spend with you. My bullshit meter was pegged again. Well, you know I'm low maintenance, and maybe I could be the guy who gets coffee for the group. She smiled a nervous, distracted smile. That would be lovely, dear. Let's see how it works out. I've been on the receiving end of that kind of deflection, and I knew what it meant. She was going to make sure I never went out to Illinois to join her. I get the feeling you'd prefer it if I didn't go with you. Oh, no, it's not that. I'm just afraid you'll be bored. You like your computers and circuits, and this is just a bunch of writers talking about big ideas. Vic, I didn't say it out loud, but in my mind, I was shouting it for the neighbors to hear. I'm really not stupid, dear. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. It's just that your mind likes to work on the details. Writers wrestle with the big life questions. Double Bic. Still, I didn't say it out loud. I knew when I was being marginalized. I'm sure you'll do great. She's caught up tonight. Later that night, after Karen went to bed, I went online to review our phone records. AT&T lets you do that. All the calls coming in and going out are logged along with text messages. I checked the phone log and the call that I interrupted wasn't with Reggie, or if it was placed from Frank's phone. It's amazing how fast trust can dissolve after 25 years of marriage when you catch your wife in a lie, and you find her making plans to exclude you. The weeks went by and all she spoke about was the workshop. I tried several times to engage her in the idea that I would go with her or go out to visit at some point, but she shot it down every time. Then she moved from reason to manipulation. Ab, I have the most wonderful news. I got you 2 tickets to a fishing camp in northern Canada in late June. You can take Jake and the 2 of you can fish for those big browns you're always talking about. It cost a fortune, but I wanted to thank you for understanding about the writer's workshop and I felt guilty that you wouldn't be enjoying yourself. So, I want you to go and have fun. Then we can compare notes when I get home. I smelled a rat. Thank you, sweetie. That was very thoughtful of you. Truth be told, I'd have more fun with you. Ab, we've been over that. It just doesn't make sense. I'll be working the whole time and I'd feel guilty ignoring you like that. I looked at her face and eyes for a moment, trying to gauge what I was seeing there. Was it condescension? Thanks, sweetheart. Canada sounds like fun. I didn't say it with much enthusiasm. In my mind, I was formulating my options. A surprise visit to Illinois was at the top of the list. Well, you could at least smile when you say it. Those tickets cost a bundle and I want you to be happy. Okay, it sounds like fun. I wandered down into the basement to tinker the rest of the evening. Ours is an old house and it has one of those floor grates in the hall. It lets hot air rise from the furnace room and was the original means of heating the first floor. When we first moved in, I made it a point not to step on it if I didn't mean to, but after a time I got used to it and forgot that it's there. The phone is also in the hall. I was quietly tinkering in the basement and considering my next move when I heard Karen place a call. Yes, I gave him the tickets. He's still resisting. I don't know. I keep telling him he won't enjoy it. No, I can't flat out tell him to stay home. I know, and I want that too, but I want to stay married at the end of it. I just want him to give me a little space to enjoy myself for a few weeks. I deserve it. I've earned it. Yes, I want those weeks with you, too. Okay, just let it be for a bit. I think he'll come around. Okay, baby, I miss you, too. Write something good for me tonight. With that, she hung up. My heart was in my throat. I'm not stupid. I know cheating when I hear it. Either Karen was having an affair, or she was planning one. Anything less and she would still have a shitload of explaining to do. It took me 20 minutes to get my thoughts together, but I knew that for the time being I needed to become the liar that I'd always despised. At least, I needed to play my cards close to my chest until I knew what I was going to do. I called upstairs and in my most loving voice said, "Karen, I'm going over to see Jake and tell him the good news." "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Have fun." And with that I was out the basement door. I needed to stay away, and Jake was just an excuse, but as I thought about it, I realized that I needed someone to talk with, and Jake had been my best friend since we were in grade school. "You are shitting me." Jake was never one to mince words. "No way, I don't believe it. She would never cheat on you, Ab." "Well, she sure is trying hard to keep me away from that workshop. And she's calling someone baby, and it sure as hell isn't me." We just sat there not speaking. That's most of what a guy needs from another guy, just sitting there and sharing the pain. "You've got to talk with her about this, Ab. You can't go the next 2 months thinking the worst and not knowing. And what will she tell me? How much you want to bet when I checked the phone record tonight it wasn't Frank she was talking? It wasn't Frank she called baby, and it wasn't Frank she's scheming with. Sorry, I won't take that bet." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to sit down and talk it out. That's what you do after 25 years. I'm going to tell her how much I love her, tell her I'm hurt that she doesn't want me to go with her, and ask her point blank what she has planned that she doesn't want me around." "You think she'll tell the truth?" "No, but I will tell her the truth, and some of it won't be what she wants to hear. She'll know I love her. She'll know that cheating on me will end us. And then she'll try to convince me that it's all in my head and I should go fishing." I paused for a moment. "By the way, I have 2 tickets for a fishing camp in northern Canada late June, and one is for you." "Sweet." Jake caught himself. "I mean, I'm here for you, buddy." I had to laugh. I've never had any doubt where his loyalties lie. We sat, talked, and drank a few for the next 3 hours, and then I headed home, face to face with wives. After dinner I asked Karen to sit with me in the living room, and I told her everything that was on my mind. Well, I told her most of it. I kept a few secrets. "Sweetheart, I'm very troubled. I don't think you've been completely honest with me about this writer's workshop. I've overheard you talking about it with your writers group back in March, but you never told me about it until you already had plans to go. I even heard you talking about how all great writers have affairs, and I confess I didn't think that was very funny. You've been talking with Frank about your trip, but when I ask about it you lie to me and tell me it's someone else. You know how I feel about that snake. Then when you told me you were accepted, you seemed to very deliberately push me away and discourage me from joining. I don't need to be there, but I wanted to join you in this big adventure. Then rather than consider bringing me along, you make a commitment for me to be somewhere else so that I have no choice. You never discussed that idea with me. You just obligated me. It seems like you are trying to guarantee that you won't have me getting in the way while you're in Illinois. I don't think you've been entirely truthful with me, and I'm starting to doubt you've been entirely faithful. Ab, I have never treated you like that, and I would never cheat on you. What is wrong with you? You're my husband, and I just want you to enjoy yourself. It hurts me that you would think that about me. I can't help how I feel or what makes me feel that way. You know I love you. I have loved you since we met, but I could never get over betrayal. Is that what you have planned, Karen? Is this writer's workshop your vacation from your marriage? I think some of you are tired to listening for this long story. Who's tired, please take a cup of coffee. Update. That was it. There was no more discussion and no more loving talk. She erupted in screams, and for the rest of the night she was either yelling or giving me the silent treatment. For the next week it was all the silent treatment. She was taking the offensive by freezing me out, punishing me until I backed down. It didn't work. In fact, it convinced me that I was right. However, I wasn't gaining any ground this way, so eventually I let her think that she had won. If she was going to cheat, there was nothing I could do to stop her. In fact, that damn phone call I overheard made it sound like she already had. Eventually, I thanked her for the Canada trip, but my mood turned dark and it never brightened again until it was over. Once she had her way, she quickly changed gears and played the loving wife to reinforce my desired behavior. It was like a switch was thrown, and that only made me more suspicious. I know manipulation when I'm on the receiving end of it. Hire a private investigator. What do you do when you know your wife is keeping secrets and playing you for a fool? What do you do when you lose trust in the woman who has held all your trust for half your life? What you do is you hire a private investigator. And that's exactly what I did. The Illinois Writers' Workshop was nearly 500 miles away, and I didn't know a soul out there. So, I asked a coworker who he used when he caught his wife cheating. I took his recommendation, and that person recommended someone in Illinois, so I reached out and contacted them. The great thing about the Writers' Workshop was that it was held on a state university campus. The PI's operatives couldn't get into the program, although they could walk past the rooms as much as they needed. But the participants would be eating in the cafeterias on campus, going to the local bars, and staying in a big dormitory with other students, so no one would notice the odd student hanging out. Some of those students would be working for me, and they would be carrying some high-tech devices. The school year was drawing to a close. Our girls both decided to stay at their universities for the summer so they could work in the research labs with faculty in their major. That meant we remained empty nesters, and I pulled out all the stops. I asked her to dinner, I cooked at home, and I even took her to some shows. She enjoyed it all, and I began to think I was winning. But whenever I told her that I loved her, I got this dismissive I know vibe off her. The pieces started falling into place. She hadn't stopped loving me. She just took me for granted. I was known. I was safe. I was her guarantee. She felt certain she could go away, have a thrill, take a vacation from her marriage, and I'd be here when she wanted me. My plans began to fall into place as a result of that. The day she left, I decided I couldn't leave anything unsaid. We stood by the door as her airport shuttle drove up. I held her in my arms, told her that I loved her, and said, please, don't do anything that will destroy us. She gave me that pissed look and said, I am tired of you not trusting me. When I get back, we are going to have a long talk about this. Then she gave me a quick peck on the cheek, picked up her bags, turned and walked to the shuttle. She drove away without so much as a glance back at me. At that point, I felt certain my marriage was over. 25 years and 2 grown daughters, and my marriage ends with more of a whimper than a bang. The pie did his job well. He told me they made it easy. There was no effort to hide their behavior since no one knew them there. Karen must have removed her rings on the plane because when she arrived at the workshop, they weren't on her finger. She told everyone she was recently divorced, and my wife and Frank immediately became inseparable. They were joined at the hip, kissing and holding hands, and huddling together like 2 high school students with their first crush. My pie managed to hide a small video camera in the hallway of the dormitory they shared. Karen and Frank were each assigned a room, but they only used the one. Well, sometimes they used hers and sometimes they used his, but always they slept together. I knew what was going on in those shared dorm rooms, but my pie and his team were very thorough and left no doubt in my mind. One night, before it grew dark, my wife and Frank retired early. 2 operatives looking like typical college students sat on the hallway floor with their backs to the wall and quietly slipped a miniature fisheye camera on a slender stalk under the door. They caught a 20-minute video of Frank hitting it like he owned it. Hell, maybe by then he did. The video was remarkably clear, and when he was finished, I could tell he wasn't wearing a condom. That did it for me. I was done with this marriage. Anything else the team caught was just icing on the cake. Times come up for divorces. My pie continued to give me regular updates, but after that first week her fate was sealed, and my decision was made. From the first days of her workshop on, I used my time to execute my plan. I would become a ghost on the wind. I would disappear or come as close to it as I could. When she returned, I would be gone, and there would be no turning back, no lies, no threats, no long discussions, no explanations, no excuses, and no fixing it. There would be only divorce. My marriage was over. Love does not die quickly, but what is love without trust? There is no future with a wife who cheats. Some people will say my solution was weak. They will say that she deserves physical punishment, total humiliation, and abject poverty. In the end, the law would prevent me from doing any of that, and I had no intention of ruining the remainder of my own life by attempting that kind of revenge on my cheating wife and her lover. My revenge would be taking from her the one thing she always counted on, the one constant that was always there to hold her up, to comfort her, to support her, and to encourage her on. I was taking away me. Frank was no catch. He could never sustain her. Where is a 50-year-old divorced mother to turn for love and emotional support? I didn't care. She would no longer be my problem. Pie update. Every few days my pie would send me more photographs, more video, and more betrayal by the one who promised me to forsake all others. The reports were hard to read. The photographs and videos were harder to watch. What was most painful were some of the audio files where they talked about me. He keeps texting me about the big fish he's catching and how great it is up there. He thanks me almost every day. She laughed as she said it. The doofus has no idea. Frank laughed. Well, best keep it that way. Treat him like a mushroom and he's out of your hair. He might as well have fun now. When I get home, I am going to lower the boom on that geek. How dare he keep accusing me of cheating? But you are taking a little holiday from your marriage, aren't you, gorgeous? Or is that another woman in my bed every night? She giggled at that. She actually giggled. The bit. He may be right, but that doesn't mean I intend to put up with it. I'm a writer, damn it, and he's holding me back with his circuits and computer codes, his milli this and micro that. What does he know of big ideas? Emotions. At that moment I started to truly hate the bit. 25 years building a life together, raising 2 children, supporting one another, and then this. What happened to my wife? Where has she gone? This woman wasn't the woman I married. This was some stranger who had usurped my wife's appearance. She was some vile alien without a heart, without a soul. Where was her love, her compassion? Hell, where was her decency? Didn't she remember the years we've lived together? And the life we made together? Didn't any of that matter? No, apparently none of that mattered. She wanted her fling and she was going to have it at any cost. She was living the life of a writer, after all, and she was due her greatness. There wasn't much I could do about that now, but I was determined that when it was over her fling was all that she would have. Revenge time. I contemplated every imaginable form of revenge, from physical violence to public humiliation. I knew that none of that would leave me satisfied so long as my life was tied to hers. There was only one choice left, and I began the process of turning from man to ghost. I sat down with my boss and I told him everything. He was sympathetic. He'd been through something similar not many years before, and he quickly got me a transfer to the company office in Portland, Maine. I liked the idea. I knew the people at that office. They were professional, capable, and I liked them. I liked the town and I liked the state. I called the movers and arranged to have half the furniture and all my personal belongings shipped north. I got my car serviced and ready for the drive. Then I sat down with a lawyer and started the papers. Karen had her own insurance and retirement account, so I took her name off everything of mine and listed my daughters as beneficiaries. I signed a quick claim so she could have the house, but in return there would be no alimony. She would get her car, but she had to buy her own insurance. I would save the bank accounts for the last few days and the charge cards for the end. There was no need to tip my hand. From that point on, all I could do was reinforce my thinking. What do I mean by that? I tried calling her to ask her how the workshop was going and to tell her I loved her. I thought that hearing her lie would help remind me that what I was doing was right. She didn't fail me. She was filled with excitement, professed her love, and ran off to dinner all in less than 2 minutes. My pie told me later that Frank was sitting next to her the whole time and they were exchanging smiles, rolling their eyes, and generally disparaging me. That helped a lot. It was all a joke to her, and there could be no doubt I was doing the right thing. From that point on, I sent her text messages instead of phone calls. I didn't trust myself to keep my composure on the phone. I told her how the fish were biting. But in truth, I sent Jake and his lovely wife on the trip. They loved it. Jake married well. I did drop by to say goodbye to them both before I left, and they promised to visit me. As her 6 weeks were coming to an end, I completed the last of my tasks. A friend who is a realtor gave me a for sale sign to put in the front yard. I couldn't actually sell the house without her permission, and I'd already deeded it to her, but she didn't know that. When she got home, that is the first thing she would see. I had the locks on the house changed just to make her feel she didn't live there anymore. Printed some choice photographs from her trip, including the most explicit stills from that video taken under Frank's door, and made a copy of the pie's report. I left it all on the dining room table just to make sure she knew she was busted. The movers had already taken most of what I wanted and would hold it in storage until I was ready. I only carried 2 suitcases, my briefcase, laptop, and guitar. I had to have my guitar with me. I couldn't trust anyone with something so dear. Frank may be sticking his dick in my wife, but I loved my guitar. I planned to leave the next morning while she wasn't due back until later that night. That way, I'd be gone when she arrived, but I had a last-minute change of heart the night before. I wanted the pain to start now when all she could do was wait and worry until she got home. I attached 3 choice photographs of her and Frank to an email with the words "I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you," and sent them off to my soon-to-be ex-wife. I chose one where they were all but copulating on the dance floor. It was clear she wasn't wearing her engagement and wedding rings. The second showed them walking hand in hand into his dorm room. I took the third from the dorm room video where her face was plainly visible. I figured she'd see them and maybe it would ruin her last romantic night with good old Frankie boy as they ran around trying to find cameras that were already removed. Then I turned off my phone. With my announcement done in my hand tip, I carried my last suitcase to the car and carefully packed my guitar in the passenger seat. Looking at the house one last time, I picked up my cell, took a quick photograph, and I climbed behind the wheel. Now, you're probably thinking I drive one of those big F-250 diesel pickups with all the extra trim. You're thinking I started the engine and the dishes rattled in my neighbor's house. Weren't you listening? I'm an engineer. I like tech. I backed out of my drive for the last time so silently that not a neighbor would know I was gone. I was a ghost on the wind moving silently through the world, leaving betrayal behind me. Driving away from the house that had been our home for so many years, the house where we raised our daughter, was at once the most painful, most uncertain, and most liberating experience of my life. For all practical purposes, my wife had died. I didn't know when and I didn't know why, but she was dead to me just as sure as I'd pulled the trigger myself. The woman that remained, the woman who looked like my wife, was no one that I knew or ever wanted to know again. I was starting over with an unknown future before me. I had the strongest sense of loss, and at the same time it was strangely freeing. The burden of lies, betrayal, and belittlement was lifted from my shoulders, if only temporarily. The only price I paid was that half my life was now lost to me. It was late, but I was wired, so I drove a quiet 100 miles up the highway with only my thoughts for company until I found a hotel for the night. I wasn't looking for any chains. I wanted a real mom and pop breakfast joint. I wanted something real. I found it and got what was likely to be my last serving of grits for a very long time to come. Those grits set me to thinking, and I began to redefine my drive to Maine. This was the first day of my rebirth, and I had a long drive ahead of me. I could rush up to Maine, running away from all my trouble, but I had 2 weeks before I was due at work. Why rush? I needed time to settle my mind, come to terms with her betrayal, and put the past behind me. I decided to go slow, enjoy the countryside as I drove north, and explore each state and its people as I passed through. It would be my week of transition from my old to my new life. I was going to indulge my taste buds along with my other senses to cleanse myself from all that was ugly and wrong with my life before and prepare myself for a new beginning. I spent the remainder of the day walking through Williamsburg with the crowds that fill the town in summer, and I checked out some remarkable artisans and craftsmen doing their thing. I managed to find a room despite not having a reservation. It wasn't until after I grabbed a light dinner and was settled in for the night that my thoughts finally turned back to my failed marriage. She was getting home about then. I wondered what she would think when she saw the for sale sign on the front lawn and her keys wouldn't unlock the door. The next day I turned north and drove the back roads toward Annapolis, the capital of Maryland, past small towns and old plantations along Virginia's ancestral rivers like the York, Rappahannock, and Potomac that feed the Chesapeake Bay. There was one ribbon of asphalt ahead of me taking me to my future. I would follow that winding ribbon as it led me away from betrayal and toward a new life of my own. Final installment of the story. Sitting in my hotel room in downtown Annapolis, I finally picked up my cell phone and turned it on. No surprise. It was full of missed calls, emails, and text messages. Most were from Karen and a few were from friends. I read and listened to them all. It was hard, but it had to be done. At first Karen was trying to tell me it wasn't what it looked like. Sure it wasn't. Those were the messages she sent from Illinois before she got home and saw the rest of the photographs and read a copy of the Pie's report. My friends were telling me that Karen was now calling everyone in an effort to find me. She just wasn't looking in the right place. Jake and his wife knew, but I left the rest of them in the dark deliberately. I would tell them once I was settled. I knew already that I couldn't play the ghost forever. The 2 calls that scared me were from my daughters. Karen had called them trying to find out where I was. I had very deliberately not told them that I was leaving their mother because I wanted to do it in person, but I couldn't let them worry. So, I called the girls and quietly explained to them what was going on. They were upset and couldn't believe their mom would do such a thing, so I sent them the same photographs I'd sent Karen the night I left home along with the report by the Pie, for them to read. After that, they swore not to tell their mother what I was doing. There was one other missed call. My lawyer informed me that Karen had been served with divorce papers. She knew I was serious now. He also told me that Frank's wife had been given a full set of photographs, videos, and audio recordings from his 6-week workshop. Take that, Frank. On day 3 I drove through northern Maryland, and then with great anticipation I arrived in New Jersey. Yeah, right. I hit the Jersey line and didn't stop until I reached Connecticut. Once in Connecticut, I did take a few hours to drive through some of the historic towns along the coast. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but the architecture was so distinctly different from North Carolina that I got a very strong sense I was someplace new both physically and emotionally. And don't tell the government, but I spent an hour in Groton just trying to see as many submarines as I could. Boy, they hide those black fish very well. While looking up and down the shore I was reminded that when they refuel those nuclear boats, they cut a hole in the hull to refuel the reactor, and then weld the hull back together. Was that a metaphor for me? Was Karen's betrayal that tore a hole in my heart nothing more than the first step in refueling my life? Could I heal myself once my new life had begun? When I rose on day 4, I knew it would be the hardest day yet. I finished my breakfast of eggs, bacon, and toast with some good black coffee, and then I was headed for Brown in a horribly painful talk with my oldest daughter, Claire. It didn't take long to get there, and I met her at her dorm in late morning. We agreed to postpone our talk until later so she could pretend to be happy for just an hour or 2. She showed me the campus and then took me to the cafeteria where she introduced me to all her friends. They were exactly the sort of young men and women I had hoped she'd find. They were pleasant, attentive, and they seemed to be mutually supportive. On our way out I took her roommate aside and told her that Claire was going to have a rough day. I asked her to look after my daughter. She said, "Yes, Mr. Baker, she told us last night. We're all here for her." Yes, my daughter chose her friends well. We sat in Claire's dorm room and we talked for hours. I showed her photographs and played audio recordings for her of the type that I never thought I'd ever share with a child of mine. She was alternating between sadness and rage. I can't believe she'd do that. Is she even the same woman who raised us? What kind of filthy tramp has she become? I had to stop her at that one, even if I agreed. Claire, no matter what she's done, she is still your mother. Plus, it's me she's betrayed, not you. Sorry to disagree with you, Dad, but she tore apart my only family. She very definitely did this to me. I couldn't argue with that. We talked through the afternoon and I briefed her on all my plans. I told her to gather her friends and we headed out to the best dinner in town, or the best that I could afford, and everyone seemed to enjoy a break from the dining hall menu. I told them stories about my dining hall experiences when I was in college, and I think they went back to their dorms with a renewed appreciation for their current situation. I took a room in town and the next morning I had breakfast with my daughter, hugged her until we both cried, and then I headed north to Boston to do it all over again. Claire must have called Denise because she took the news a good deal better than her older sister. There was just as much disappointment and anger, but much less surprise. She asked to see the proof and I showed her. As luck would have it, her mother called while we were talking and I gave her the universal sign for no, I'm not here. I shook my head and waved my hands like a madman and drew my finger across my throat like a knife. She nodded. Denise was always the less dramatic member of the family. Then she did what I thought I would never witness. She said, Dad did call last night. Is it true you've become a cum slut that cheats on her husband and lies about it? I was speechless. I wanted to reprimand her for talking to her mother that way, but at the same time I had to agree with what she said. You've heard me, mother. You spent 6 weeks being some creep's fuck buddy while your husband sat home alone. Was it worth it, mother? Was it worth losing your marriage over? Holy shit. This daughter of mine has a mouth on her. Remind me never to piss her off. There wasn't much discussion after that. Denise told me her mother was mostly crying and trying to make excuses when she could, but my daughter was buying none of it. Later, I took her and her friends to a Thai restaurant not far from campus called the Elephant Walk. Like her sister, Denise had chosen her friends well and dinner was very pleasant. As we walked back to campus, one of her friends said, Mr. Baker, Denise told us what you're going through. She was very sad last night, but we were there for her. I hope you come back sometime and let us take you to the cafeteria. That made the rest of the friends laugh. I mean, well, actually, maybe we can find someplace better than that. That got the giggles started and we laughed the whole way back to her dorm. I found a room for the night, took my daughter to breakfast in the morning, and day 7 found me continuing my drive north. I left Boston and was just 2 hours south of Portland. My mind was now less on my soon-to-be ex-wife and more on my daughters. They were growing into strong, principled young women and I was so very proud of them. I knew now that they would get through the coming divorce better than I had feared. What made this day hard was that I was leaving these 2 wonderful jewels behind me now with no promise of when I would see them again. It turned out I needn't have worried. I wasn't ready to face the reality of starting my new life yet, so when I reached Portsmouth, New Hampshire, I turned west and headed for the White Mountains and the Presidential Range. I drove into the Whites and took the cog railway to the summit of Mount Washington. As I stood there looking across the void to the lesser peaks of the Whites, and scanning the green pine forests below, feeling the cold chill of Arctic winds that are so incongruous during the first days of August, I finally felt reborn. I was standing alone, but at last I was standing. I had passed through the birth canal of the mid-Atlantic states as I transitioned from my old life of pain and regret to start my new life, and all the possibilities it held. I now stood on high ground ready to begin life anew. Everything I could want lay before me. In the morning I got a plate of pancakes with real maple syrup. I was in maple syrup country now and I would be for years to come. I was rested and ready, so I got back in my car and I drove to Portland. I got there mid-afternoon, so I decided to check in with my new boss to let them know I'd arrived. I already knew about half the office staff and I was warmly received. It felt good. They were the first happy, uncomplicated faces I'd seen in a week. My new boss is named Henry and he brought the office together to meet me. I got a quick tour of the shop, but not until everyone made a collective decision of where we would all go for dinner. I figured it would be a restaurant downtown, but we wound up at Henry's house grilling steaks with all the fixing. I know I should have had lobster in Maine, but I had all the time in the world for that. This was about reintegrating into society. Over some remarkably good steaks and some truly excellent local beer they asked me for my story. What was a southern boy doing uprooting everything and moving to Maine at this point in his life? So, I told them. I left out the gory details, but I gave them enough to know. I ended with a small request. I might be a little short-tempered in the coming weeks. It's not my basic nature, but I have a lot to work through. I just hope if I behave badly, you'll call me on it and tell me to knock it off. I need a little pushback from time to time. I didn't expect it, but every woman there hugged me and gave me a kiss on the cheek, and every man put his arm around my shoulder. We're here for you, Ab. That was all they said and all they ever needed to say. That night, after I settled into my hotel room, I turned on my cell once again. The girls had each texted me their support. They must have given their friends my number because I had at least 8 or 10 additional text messages from the young men and women who appreciated dinner and wanted me to know they would be there for my daughters. I love those kids. Several friends continued to reach out, so I decided to contact them all and tell them what was going on so they would stop worrying. I didn't tell them where I was. That would come later. I only told them why I had left. They didn't want to believe, so I sent them the same 3 photographs I'd sent Karen and told them that I had much worse if they were unconvinced. I thought about it, but honestly, I couldn't see a single reason to protect her from her own decision. I'd tried and I'd failed, so let the chips fall. In time, I got messages of love and support from them all and I promised to stay in touch. It was rapidly becoming clear to me that my plans to become a ghost were just a fantasy. There were too many people who cared about me, and that's a good thing. I read the remainder of the text messages from Karen and I listened to the missed calls. She finally came clean and confessed, but her confession was tinged with odd flares of anger. She was blaming me, one way or another, for what she did and for what I did and for everything that had happened. Well, fuck that shit. I texted her and said I would call her the next day at noon. Sooner or later it had to be done. Let's just say it was an unsatisfying conversation. She alternated between blame, guilt, and denial. She was sorry. Frank's personality overpowered her. I was suffocating her. It was my fault because I worked too much. It didn't happen, they were just fooling around. But nothing serious. I almost broke out in laughter when she told me she was only trying to find her muse. She even accused me of turning our daughters against her as if her own actions had not done that without my help. When she was finally quiet, I laid it out for her simply and clearly. She conspired with Frank to cheat on me. She resisted my attempts to keep us together. She carried out the betrayal, and now she was paying the price. I no longer cared why. When I hung up, she was still crying and pleading her case. I was done with her. There was no going back. I knew too much. I found a simple, but comfortable, 2-bedroom walk-up apartment in an old building within walking distance of the office. I figured I could use the exercise and thought it would be temporary, but my thinking soon changed. I could live simply in town, avoid all the extra work normally associated with a house, and I could get a little cottage on the coast for the weekend. Then I thought, why a cottage? I could get a boat, keep it in the harbor, and that would be my cottage by the shore. It was early fall by the time I figured all that out. I expected to have a lonely life, but it hasn't really turned out that way. I see my daughters more now than I did when I was living in Raleigh. They come up at least one weekend every month and always bring a few friends with them. For 36 hours my apartment becomes a hive of activity, and somehow, I always manage to take them all out for dinner at some point. By the time they leave, I desperately need the peace and quiet, although I miss them as soon as they walk out the door. I've also been surprised that several of my friends have come up to visit, and the others all promise to come when the weather is better. I do live alone, but I am not lonely. I have a growing number of new friends both from work and my adventures. The sailing community here is vibrant and welcoming to all, and I've met some interesting women in my wandering. But I'll do this right and behave myself until the marriage is officially and legally ended. I still hear from Karen, although the divorce will be final soon. She has never really repented and prefers to tell me that I made too much of it. All she ever says is, everyone does it. It doesn't mean anything. Yes, it does. The sex means plenty and the lies and manipulation mean even more. I contemplated explaining it to her, but people change and I could no longer see the point. The truth is I haven't managed to completely detach my life from hers. With 2 daughters and a lot of mutual friends, I know that will never happen. Still, with 600 miles between us, I no longer live with the day-to-day rejection and betrayal. She was the most important thing in my life until I was no longer hers. Now, I have my own life and a future that is mine to make. Several good things came of all this. For starters, I genuinely like it up here. I'm in the middle of my first Maine winter, which is a bit of a shock. But if they can do it, so can I. It gets dark early up here, but in some ways that just makes the gatherings indoors warmer and brighter. I've started looking for a boat and I've found a yard with moorings not far from town, so I think spring might find me splicing line and applying varnish. The restaurants are good, the micros are great, and the people are genuine. There's music of all kinds, dances if you are willing to learn to contra dance, and surprises that I'm still discovering. I think life will be good for me after all. Is my heart refueled? Not yet, but time heals, and I know there is a better life ahead. Oh, and Frank's wife seems to be as much a dinosaur stuck in the past as I am. She kicked his worthless ass out of the house and divorced him. Worse than that, both Karen and Frank remain unpublished. I know that some people will complain that Ab didn't get revenge. He should take a steel pipe to Frank's knees, tie Karen to a chair and pluck her pubic hairs with a pliers, but I don't think a 50-year-old engineer will do well in prison. I think he will do well in Portland, surrounded by good people, meeting new women, and being visited by his loving daughters and their friends. So, let his happiness be his revenge. You may wonder what happened to Karen and Frank. You tell me, they are both involved with someone who lies and cheats. Their future will be what they make of it, and they deserve every minute of their own creation. End the story. Thank you for joining us on Revolving Time, where we bring you real-life stories that explore the complexities of the human experience. We hope that our stories have provided you with insights, inspiration, and a renewed appreciation for the power of human resilience. Our storytellers have shared their unique perspectives and experience, shedding light on issues that are often overlooked or misunderstood. We are honored to have been able to amplify their voices and share their stories with you. We believe that storytelling has the power to create understanding and empathy, and we are committed to continuing to share stories that challenge and expand our understanding of the world. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and stay connected with our community. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories and events, and you'll have access to a library of inspiring content. Thank you for being a part of our journey, and we look forward to sharing more powerful stories with you in the future.